Brian there on WNYC. With us now, historian of marriage, Stephanie Coontz. Her classic book that blew the whistle on false nostalgia was called The Way We Never Were. In a new book, she explores personal and policy choices that could make marriage the best it could be for most couples at a time when marriage rates are in decline. Here's some polling data to set this up. Americans still overwhelmingly say marriage is the highest commitment a couple can make. About 7 in 10 Americans say marriage is important for a fulfilling life. That's according to the most recent Pew Research data from 2023. But among young adults, the number is much lower. That Pew survey found that among people 18 to 34 in this country, only 20% said being married is extremely or very important for living a fulfilling life. There's a gender gap in that data, too, with more and more young women saying marriage is less relevant to them. And not surprisingly, the sentiment also skews more liberal than conservative politically, so there's that political gap as well. Stephanie Coontz is the Director of Research and Public Education for the Council on Contemporary Families and Professor Emeritus now at the Evergreen State College. Another of her previous books, Marriage, A History, was cited in the U.S. Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage back in 2015. In her new book, out this week, titled For Better and Worse, she takes on this paradox, what she calls the marriage paradox, and argues that both camps dominating public debates, that's those who see marriage as the only path to happiness, also, the so-called trad wife movement, and those who see it as inherently oppressive, are wrong. Instead, she proposes what she calls a radical middle ground, grounded in history and new social science research. And she joins us now. Stephanie Coontz, welcome back to WNYC. It's been a while.
Yes, it has, Brian. Thank you.
And you open the book by saying this is neither a case for marriage nor against it. Explain.
Well, the thing is exactly what the poll shows. It is now possible to have a fulfilling life outside marriage. It was often possible, but not allowed to do so through most of history. But marriage still remains the highest expression of commitment that most people can imagine. And most people want eventually to marry. Even the young people that you mentioned in that poll, only about 8% of them say they definitely do not expect to marry. But the point is that precisely because we value marriage more and have higher standards for marriage than the past, we're more cautious about entering it. We're less sure that we should enter it if we're not completely ready to enter it and our spouse isn't ready to enter it. And actually, there's good research to support that kind of caution. So I tried in this book to explain that marriage did not originate as the oppressive institution that some feminists believe, but it also has not been the benevolent institution that many other people think. So let's figure out how it's changed and what its possibilities are.
So listeners, we can take your calls on a few tracks here, calls and texts, especially for our younger listeners, millennials, Gen Zers. How do you and your friends feel about marriage as an institution? 212-433-WNYC. Just call and report on what kinds of conversations you're having about this, especially if you're single and relatively young, never been married. If you're ambivalent, tell us what factors you consider the most, kind of pulling you in one direction or the other. And if you did get married, maybe after not being so sure about, this would be for another group of you, why did you decide to make the leap? And what have you learned as a married person compared to your preconceptions? 212-433-WNYC, call or text 212-433-9692. And even for those of you who are in committed longer-term relationships, either marriage or some other relationships, but are averse to what we see in the U.S. as traditional marriage, especially with its gendered roles. And, of course, if you're in a same-sex marriage, you are totally invited as well. What traditions have you kept or changed or invented yourselves in your own romantic relationships of any kind. 212-433-WNYC for Stephanie Coontz, 212-433-9692, her new book, For Better and Worse. And Stephanie, you call outdated ideas about gender, love, and marriage earworms. Earworms. You mean like a song you can't get out of your head, but you're stuck with it?
Exactly. We have a lot of those. You know, one thing you just said when you were asking the callers to come in about marriage as an institution, I think the really big change is that for thousands of years, marriage counted more as an institution than it did as a relationship. And today, what people value about marriage is the relationship. You know, I remember the old Mae West line, marriage is a fine institution, but I don't want to be in an institution. People want to be in a relationship. And our standards for marital relationships are so much higher than any time in the past that people want to be really sure that they can live up to those standards, and that's the relationship that counts. And of course, as you say, there are people who can develop relationships that don't have that institutional framework, but it's also true that it still retains a lot of respect, that parents, for example, are much more accepting of their kids' partnerships if the kids get married. So it remains an important relationship to people and a way of saying this is the highest commitment I can imagine. Now, those earworms you talk about, one of the themes of my book is that we've inherited a lot of institutions, habits, and ideas about what love should be, about what men should do, about what women should do, that have become these sort of simple earworms that, to just push the analogy a little far, that prevent us from developing more complex melodies for the relationships that we want nowadays.
Let's take a call. Eric in Westchester, you're on WNYC. Hi, Eric.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making your call. You've got a story about you and your friends, I see.
Yes, I wanted to speak to the way that my generation, at least from my friends that I've spoken to, view marriage. And I believe the big decider of whether we're pro or against marriage or whether we'll think we're getting married is whether our parents are divorced or not. Personally, my parents are divorced, and I have a lot of friends whose parents are not divorced. And we can agree on so many things about relationships, but when it comes down to marriage, we're like, oh, I would never get married, or, oh, I'm definitely going to get married. And I think that being exposed to that when you're young has a lot to do with how you're going to view it as you grow up.
Oh, that's so interesting. You said you're having, these conversations among people of your generation. How old are you, if I may ask?
I'm 20 years old.
And already people are anticipating whether or not they might want to get married at any point in their lives, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
What's your own thought, if you're willing to get personal?
Since my parents have been divorced, and before that, have always been very open to the idea of not getting married at all. It just never seemed something that appealing to me. Even if I go in and out of relationships and I want to be with people for long periods of time, marriage always just felt like something additional or artificial on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Because you're bringing the state, the government into it, right?
Yes, or religion, which I may not totally subscribe to.
Right. Eric, thanks so much. Call us again. Stephanie Coontz, sound familiar?
Well, yes, except that it's more complicated than that. It really kind of depends on how the divorce went. There are plenty of people who get married after their parents' divorce who felt that it was because it wasn't a good marriage. It tends to slow them down and make them decide that they want to make really sure that it's going to be a good marriage. But, of course, if it was one that conflict continued in, that's one of the big differences between divorces that are successful and that people can move on and ones that are not. I totally understand what your caller's talking about.
Amanda in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hi, Amanda. Thanks for calling.
Hi, thanks. I have two points that I wanted to make. Actually, because your last caller talked about divorce, I'm 28 years old, and my parents were divorced. In my life, they never had a successful marriage. But I actually am excited to get ready to get married to my boyfriend in the next couple of years. And I'm just not scared of divorce. Of course, I'm not getting married with the intention of getting divorced, but I think something in our generation maybe that I've heard is that, like, it's really not the end of the world. It's much more better than staying together in an unsuccessful marriage. So that's been something I've thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that it's, for my friends at least, it's less about like, okay, we're getting married and now we're married people. It's the relationship doesn't change because we're already so committed and been together so long. But we often see it as like a gift for the community, you know, like giving our friends something to celebrate, showing that these two people are a unit now. And I don't know, we're just excited about the celebration of it.
So maybe our previous caller would have said, you can have the celebration without bringing the state or a religious institution, unless, you know, you're both in the same religious institution and you like that, those institutions into it. You can have a commitment ceremony without getting married. Have you thought about that, or what would you say to somebody who raised that?
Me? Amanda?
You? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know a friend of mine who would like to do that. She's not interested in getting married and just wants to have a wedding. So that's an option too. But I think there's financial benefits to getting married too, unfortunately, in America, you know. So there's some other factors there.
Amanda, thanks. So interesting. Just the first two callers, both in their 20s, you know, with some different attitudes toward this at this point.
Yeah, and one thing that people should know is that divorce rates have fallen sharply since the 1970s. In the much lower divorce rates even than there were in the 1960s. But the interesting thing is that's because people are being more selective about when they marry and who they marry. And they're thinking it over more so that they don't run into it. So you have a pretty good shot if you enter a marriage now. But the problem is that many people, for good reasons, with the economic pressures that we're under, the time pressures we're under, and all the research and people know from personal experience that those kinds of pressures undermine the patience, the negotiation, the constant, really egalitarian relationships that are now necessary to make marriage work. So people are increasingly reluctant to enter marriage until they feel that they've got the economic stability, the social maturity. And when they do enter it, their divorce rates are much lower than they were 20 years ago.
You write in the book, there is no such thing as the traditional marriage. No such thing as the traditional marriage. Really?
Right. No matter how you define it. You know, my work on the history of marriage was actually cited by in the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage. But both sides, in their opinions, really kind of, I think, misunderstood what I was saying. The ones who really were happy to see marriage had this idea that, they quoted the idea that marriage had always been the way of, giving people the best honor. It was the most totally good commitment you could have. It was, it implied respect and honor on everybody. Well, a lot of traditional marriages, and for thousands of years, most traditional marriages were extremely male-dominated, in which women and children were subject to the whims and sometimes the brutality of the man. But at the same time, we know going back in history, and this is something I had to learn when I was just exposed to these things, and as a young kind of influenced by feminism and had seen all the oppression, I thought, marriage is oppressive. But then when we study marriages in the earliest band-level societies and probably what we think we are Paleolithic ancestors, it turned out to be more a way of making connections, spreading, getting in-laws in a certain sense who could cooperate with you. And in fact, at my own marriage, one of the things that we explicitly said to the guests, we are not bringing you here to celebrate our personal, cocooning relationship. We're bringing you here because we hope that you will expand your networks by the relationships that we all have with each other. And I think that's a very interesting way to look at it.
You talk about your earlier book being cited in the same-sex marriage Supreme Court case. I've always kind of thought, but you studied this, so you could tell me if you think it's actually true, that as marriage became something to be more skeptical of, especially among more progressive Americans, it started to come back, or it started to regain its aura of romance through same-sex marriage, right? Because in the 20s and the 20-teens before the Supreme Court decision, maybe even to this day, who were the most enthusiastic people about marriage, who couldn't wait to get married? It was gay and lesbian couples.
Of course, not all of them. Some of them have principled
those who
objections
wanted
to it,
right?
Yes, and what we've seen really illustrates why marriage continues to provide a halo effect that some people want to get in on. In the states that legalized same-sex marriage before it was nationally legalized, we found that the children of homosexuals were doing better in school, feeling less bullied. That there was something about their parents, one of their parents, having access to this institution that made them feel more like accepted in society. And right. So I think that's, and the other thing that I think is really important about same-sex marriage, when we talk about those earworms, is they have a lot to teach heterosexual couples about how to avoid some of the conflicts that men and women have been having over housework and childcare and stuff like that, because they don't come with these assumptions that men have to do this and women have to do this. Mm-hmm. So they negotiate more, and that's a very helpful thing, a tip that they can lend to heterosexual couples getting married.
Kristen in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC with Stephanie Coontz, author now of For Better and Worse. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, Brian. Can you hear me?
Yes, we got you.
Great. First-time caller, long-time listener. I've been wanting to say that forever.
Glad you're on.
I'm great to be here. Great to be a part of this conversation. I'm just resonating so much with so many of the things that you're sharing. I'm 42 years old. I've lived here in New York for almost 20 years. I've been very career-oriented, and I have always believed in marriage. My parents just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary a couple of years ago. But I think, amongst my friends, many of those who are still in, middle America, got younger, had kids at an earlier age. Living here in New York, I feel like, again, it is career driving me, but I want certain things in place before marriage, and I very much really do want marriage. I've been in a long-term relationship, and that's something that I hope for our future. But I do see the, looking at each other's financial lives or your health, and so you feel like you know who you are at this point, but also you want to kind of want to put some accountability on each other if you're going to be legally bound. And I've also seen situations where there's a union. Someone mentioned earlier in a call where sometimes if you don't want the legal element, but you want that connection, that extension of community, by sharing your love, you're sharing it with a lot of people and bringing them together. I don't necessarily think you always have to be legally bound for your relationship to mean something. But I think, nowadays it's just been more about personally and amongst some of my friends who live here, just taking your time, solidifying yourself a bit more. And that way you're really coming into a marriage with, a strong sense of self and health and individuality that you're bringing together in the union.
Yeah, nicely said. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks for the first-time call. Don't make it a last-time call. And I guess, kind of to her point, Stephanie, the average age of marriage among people who do get married is getting older, right?
Much older, yes. And that's another interesting change. In the 1950s, the marriage age fell to the early, one of the reasons that I say there's no traditional family, people think that was traditional. The age of marriage fell to an all-time low in America. Majority of women married before they could legally have a glass of champagne at their wedding. Now, in that era, though, if you were a woman and you didn't marry by the time you were 25, you had a higher risk of either never marrying or getting a divorce if you married. Now that has changed completely around for some of the things your callers have, because of some of the things your callers have been talking about. As people enter it with more maturity, with more thought beforehand, a woman's chance of divorce falls for every year she delays marriage up to about 34. Then it levels off, and then after 40s, the divorce rate it decreases again. So that's my encouraging words to your last caller.
Yeah, but further to that point, I think in your book you write that the post-war system of near universal marriage rested on two pillars, and one was an economy where the average young man could get a living wage job upon leaving high school or the military and expect his wages to rise steadily. I guess we call that a family wage, right? One income could support the wife and kids. And the other was a legal system and social environment in which a woman had little chance to participate in the prosperity of the era. These are all your words from the book. So both of those things have sort of come to, if not an end, to be much more rare. Women have a lot more opportunity in the workplace, and the single wage earner making enough money to support a family without a second spouse working, if there are kids, it's much harder.
Exactly. I mean, I think that in some ways people are missing the wrong things about the 1950s. 1950s marriages had much higher rates of domestic violence. This was an era that it wasn't illegal to forcibly rape your wife. That was not called rape in any state in the Union, and not until 1992 did the last two states make it illegal to rape your wife. But so I don't think you would want to idealize those kind of marriages. But certainly it was a period when income growth was much more egalitarian. There's a statistic I cite in the book. Two Rand Corporation economists recently estimated that if the equitable distribution of income growth occurred from 1945 after the war to 1974 had continued, by 2018, the income of the people in the bottom 90%, black, whites, low earners, medium earners, would have been 67% higher than it actually ended up. But who got that 67%? The richest 10% of Americans.
One more call. Adrian in Queens. You're on WNYC. Hi, Adrian.
Hey, Brian. Love your show. I'm 38. My girlfriend is 32. She really wants to get married for, I think, security in the relationship, security emotionally, and I suspect financial security. I'm not exactly marriage averse, but have no real, it's not really something that's on my checkbox. Other callers have mentioned their career or kids. You know, marriage is not something that I prioritize. I do, however, prioritize being with my girlfriend, so we are getting married. I don't want to, not be with her. But if it was up to me, I think we would have all the things that she wants. It just wouldn't look like marriage.
Adrian, thank you very much. Stephanie, interesting. There's no question about the commitment there, it sounds like, but different attitudes toward the institution or legal status.
That's right, and he's willing to make that commitment despite being a little bit considerably less eager than she is. I hope that it's been the kind of conversation that allows them to explore the what-ifs and what are the trade-offs and what we expect to do to make it go forward if we do this. And I suspect that if they have that kind of conversation, it will go well.
Adrian, you can call us back one day and do an on-air proposal if you would like. We'll make room for that. We've got about a minute and a half. Can you give us your thought on or some thoughts on this so-called trad wife movement and what you might think from your perspective as a marriage historian that it's really about?
Well, it's interesting that you raised that, because one of the things I say in this book is, in a certain sense, I criticized my earlier description in the book that we first talked about back in 1992, American Families and the Nostalgia Trap. I mean, I had pretty good reason for being, kind of scornful of the idea that 1950s marriages were good. I've talked already about the child abuse rates were higher, domestic violence was higher. When states started passing unilateral divorce laws, first in 1960s from Governor Reagan of all people, and in the 1970s, they more and more of them happened. Every state that got them found that there was in the next 5 years, yes, an initial surge in divorce, but also a 20% decline in wives' suicide rates and a big decline in domestic violence reports. So people needed to get out of those marriages. But that doesn't mean that we can't go forward from it. What I've begun to recognize, though,
and we have 15
is
seconds.
Nostalgia is misplaced. What people are really nostalgic about is the fact that you could buy a home in this period, 2 times the median income instead of the 6 times that it is today, and raised income was rising, wages were rising. So I think that's what underlies that nostalgia, and that we should be sympathetic to it and help people reorient it toward the real problems they're facing.
Stephanie Coontz's new book is For Better and Worse, The Complicated Past and Challenging Future of Marriage. Thanks so much for sharing it with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.